that's what really caught my eye, because I had already created my own cryptocurrency called Chichi Cash. I never had actually deployed it due to legal reasons, and discord between myself and PayPal. I'm a principal right now. I'm a principal software architect at LCRA. LCRA, you all know LCRA? Energy, power, people. They manage the river. They provide wholesale electricity. Been around since the 30s. Pseudo-government agency. Very aggressive in the communities there. My areas are IoT, AI, cloud, of course, blockchain, and ICOs. Right? Again, in 2015, I founded Austin Blockchain Technology to create a community, right? Just as Brandon has created the Lisk blockchain, Lisk Meetup here, to create a community and spread it out. My focus has been more on what we would call the permission blockchain as opposed to permissionless, although I do cover both spaces and deal in both spaces. But right now, a lot of my interest and work is more towards the permission blockchains in the areas of infrastructure, enterprises, as opposed to the permissionless blockchain that runs things like Lisk. The purpose tonight is to talk about blockchain governance. So we're at a point now in blockchain maturation where, believe it or not, people are talking about governance. So that's something that shows a sign of maturity on the scale. That we're blockchain, crypto economics, cryptocurrency, tokens, ICOs, this whole new thing, right, is doing this. And we're at the very beginning right now. So we're going to talk about how governance applies more from a philosophical point of view, because it really matters right now to wrap our heads around that aspect of it and then apply it to this new thing called blockchain, because at the end of the day, looking out 20 years, it's going to change civilization. And we now have the ability to help steer that, right? How that's going to play out. We're going through a transformative society. Blockchain is going to usher in that transformation. Everything from the lights above us, cars we drive, to the devices that you control, and the places that you build, the systems that you deal with. They're all going to be touched. The roadmap tonight to try to get a handle on this is something I came up with for myself to try to put my mind, to try to make it quantified in my mind. And then we're going to look at what does it mean, what people are thinking, right? And then implementing today, and then a little bit about the future and around. So the focus is, what is it? What are people thinking about it? And what are people doing? And we're at a very early stage. So I came up with this concept when I was contemplating this whole space, 6 dimensions. Because when I look at blockchain governance in general, I find these 3 axes with these particular dimensions on each end that quantify, in my mind, a space that really you can put anything into that box, right? But imagine governance, because governance is a difficult term to really get around. And this is why, because it spans 3 different axes, 6 different dimensions. It goes from the explicit to the implicit, from the direct to the indirect, and from the local to the global. So if you start down at the bottom, text, then you have direct, explicit, and local. Think of yourself, self-governance. Think of your own body. Your body has systems in it that are governing. They're local, they're explicit, and they're direct. When you get a pain in your chest, there's nothing more explicit and direct or local. But when NATO meets in Geneva, and they decide some accord, and the United States is part of that, it affects your life. It governs how you will behave. Indirectly, inexplicitly, and globally. So from one extreme to the other. And life fits inside that in the concept as far as where we're going to be looking at governance. And let's try to just focus on, when we think about this, just blockchain governance. We're going to start big with governance, but remember, we're talking about how it will apply to this thing called blockchain. So, quickly, explicit, right? Stated clearly. And I put this up here because this is like a lot of times just goes right over the head. No, it means stated clearly. If it's explicit, it's stated clearly and in detail. There's no confusion. The minor's intentions were made explicit. We knew what the minors were going to do. We didn't guess. Are they going to fork or not? Implicit, right? Well, obviously, the opposite. Direct and indirect. How does this apply? So you give, right, someone official orders. When your boss is standing over you telling you to do this, that's pretty direct. When you get a comment, oh, this or that, it's like I said, indirect comment that maybe, you should change something. So, in our context, the developers directed the protocol to perform a community breaker service. He directed that no token from those blacklisted wallets could be sold. So who gave him that power? What governance gave them that? Local and global, right? So it's pretty local, relating to a particular area or neighborhood. This gets a little vague when you're talking about blockchain, but not necessarily, because as we move into solving problems of throughput and scalability, we already have a concept of side chains, things that hang off of a main chain to do particular work, and there's already cryptocurrencies, blockchains that are created specifically to do this, to allow others to create currencies off of their main chain. You start your own neighborhood currency, you have your own side chain that does all the neighborhood transactions, and then every month you all roll it up, right, and put it out on the main chain. Global, right? Well, I mean, that's where we're at today when we look at the blockchains, right? We're struggling with it. But global, local, will there be a Texas gold blockchain? Will there be an international monetary blockchain? Now we're looking at the meaning of the word. What does it mean, governance? What does that actually mean? To govern. All the way back to Plato's day. Plato said, to steer. That's governance. To govern, right? They started figuring that out back then in their society, that they needed something more, okay, to govern their complex societies. But they realized here's the key. We have policy, actions, and affairs. This applies to blockchain. Control, influence, and regulate. The 6 terms that you want to keep in mind when you're looking at blockchain. Every cryptocurrency is a blockchain. Governing body. Well, if you govern, you got to have a governing body, right? Today, governing bodies are pretty much made up of people, right? But there are governing bodies that are completely autonomous systems inside NASA systems, inside Netflix. There's governing bodies, little bots that run around, creating havoc, to test other bots to make sure they're doing their job. In the world of blockchain, this is very relevant because this is one of the things we're going to be talking about. Because right now there's 2 sides of the house of how you govern. Governance, all the processes. Okay? It's not one thing. It's not write a set of rules and you're done. That's weak. Okay? There's far more involved if you're looking at governance. Primarily, you want the rules, the norms, and the actions. So this is what, when you look at these blockchains, what are their rules, what's their norms, and what actions are they taking? How are they structured? What about sustainability? Obviously, if you're buying crypto coins, you're concerned about sustainability. Because if you're not going to sustain, then you're never going to get the rise you want. The degree of formality. Today we see tremendous separation here between informal, i.e. Ethereum is pretty informal, even though there's a foundation, right? Bitcoin, really? There's a formal governance there? Governance takes many different forms, though, and that's important to understand. Because even though you can't see the governance, it's there. Okay? It's behind the curtain. Vitalik Buterin has a word. When he talks, they listen. He doesn't have the governing power that many want you to believe. Okay? But he does have power. He does govern. But at the end of the day, there's a chaotic force of individuals there that all have their motivations. Basically, we're looking at two types here going forward, either an open form or a closed form. So if we have an open form that's going to satisfy the people and the visions that I have for blockchain and what it can do to transform civilization in our society and make us all have a better life and save lives, as opposed to a closed form, which is a closed cryptocurrency, designed to do nothing more than infiltrate, control a market, and allow an exit for the early entrants. So you have to ask yourself. But at the same token, it could be a good thing too. A closed foundation controlling a particular blockchain. And it will happen, and there's a need for it. And then the implicit direct forces you must always keep in mind have a tendency to sway how people think and how it governs. The media is a classic example. We're all inundated every day trying to be governed by media. Recently, I read an article where health changed in Minnesota, 140 of their fitness centers, not because of management, but because of the members said, turn off the news. We don't want to watch the news anymore. We want to work it out. The media governs indirectly. Neighbors, peers, hey, I just made so much money in X, Y, Z. That's governing you too. Because now you're going to. So these implicit, remember that dimension? Things that govern. Things you're not even aware of that are governing you. Finally, when you break it down from a science, and governance is a science. There are companies that have institutes built to grant you certificates that show that you know how to govern. But essentially, it's an old art. And we've broken it down by these particular categories of level, field, model, and then normative and practical, right? But you can see under this. So where do you think might be looking out in the future? When we come back, where will we see blockchain in there? Perhaps for the model of governance next to what? Participatory? Multi-level? Meta? Collaborative? Information technology? The internet? Well, I can tell you right now, the Internet Governance Forum is heavily on governance and blockchain. But this is what you need to look at, because these are the actual practical things around governance, and blockchain will probably touch all of this. So, wrapping up, we're talking about policy, actions, and affairs. Affairs, think of relationships. The actions, are they going to fork? Are they not going to fork? Are they going to increase the block size? Or are they not going to increase the block size? Right? What's the gas cost? What are they going to do about the gas cost? It's going too high. And then policy. Control the blockchain, influence the blockchain, and regulate the blockchain. So why is this even important? Governance of the blockchain. Because it's the way the blockchain can police itself. And if you're investing in blockchain via cryptocurrency, you should be concerned about that, because so if you want a legitimate marketplace, with the method, thinking about it now. No longer the meaning. We already know what the meaning of it is. Let's start thinking about it. So it's a method of governing the blockchain like a sovereign state. Put in customs, policies, laws, Token hold from the highest to the lowest of the token holders. Why should the whales, right, destroy all of the little guys? What I see the blockchain, what really one thing turned me on was an opportunity for the other 98%. Maybe I'm dreaming, but hey, even if 50% of the 99% could get a lift, what do you think? You don't want this to happen. Failed blockchain. That's an acronym for decentralized autonomous organization. That's the holy grail. Think about that. A decentralized autonomous organization. Didn't work. Doesn't mean it didn't work philosophically or conceptually. It didn't work with the code. Code, right? It's always code. Bitcoin, hard forking, the prime argument why we need governance. And it needs to be well executed. You can't just put it up there as lip service. You've got to execute it. When you execute it, think about the benchmark of like an internal affairs department and the police. They're going to weed out the bad with extreme prejudice. I don't know about you, but I like that. To know that that's happening in my blockchains. What's emerging is probably the foundation structure. And you see this, right? To get close to it, right? This holy grail of governance. Like throw up a foundation, the foundation sort of separates the interests, right? So, but watch that, because while it's possible, it's also something to keep an eye on, right? But through a foundation, there's an opportunity to bring in some of this governance, as opposed to, right, corporations. Corporations have boards do the governance, right? So now we're talking about, well, we don't want corporations in blockchain. No, we don't want the Cisco blockchain acting in blockchain. We want to go, right? We want our blockchain. But again, how do you govern it? So you have to have a foundation. So, right? We know all about foundations, but they're not perfect either, right? Principles. So we decide, okay, great, we got it, we're going to do it. What are the principles? Ray Dalio, he loves principles, so he would love this. He owns, I don't know what he said own, but he started the largest hedge fund in the world, multi-billionaire. This whole mantra is about principles. Principles of life. He has a book out now on Amazon. Ray Dalio. Very smart. So principles. Let's start with token holder recognition. Okay? It's important. I mean, after all, you're funding it. Right? You're the one giving it life. So you deserve recognition. Not only the little guys, not only the big guys, but the little guys. You hear all the time about how little guys can't get any of the currency. They can't get any of the currency on the ICOs, right? They did well in. Systems can't handle the load. The little guys lose out. Right? A year later, currency's over 10,000 up, whatever. But the point is, it's not being distributed fairly. So give them recognition and help yourself. Not this problem. Token holder interest is played right into it. Right? Token holders are like shareholders. Okay? They're not third-world citizens. They're not just putting a penny in your chip cup. Okay? Putting a hard-earned faith, love, heart, soul, whatever. They're putting their future down. So give them what they respect. Give them the interest. Okay? Build that community. Build the interest. You're bored. Doesn't really seem too much of a way you're going to escape this. You're going to have some kind of a board to manage the blockchain. If you're creating it, or you're looking to buy cryptocurrency, buy a blockchain, these are things you're going to want to look at, right? So the board members, you want ethical behavior. It sounds like something you wouldn't have to say, but you really do. And you need to codify it. You need to put it in writing. Remember being explicit. being explicit. Being a programmer, right, an architect, systems designer, I'm really adamant about details. So I go overboard often about being explicit because of code, right? It only does what I explicitly tell it to do. It won't infer. So when I design systems, right, and keep in mind we're talking about blockchain, and our board may end up being a bunch of bots, AI, not humans, but the best bots on the market that you can program, that you can give ethical behavior to. You just define to them what's your ethical behavior. This is not science fiction, folks. There are already emotive systems being sold into the marketplace. Emotive. Machines that can read your emotion. I'm not that good. If I was, I could read every one of your emotions. I can tell what you're thinking almost. Transaction transparency. Geez, we do need this, right? Isn't that sort of what the ledger's all about? Transparency? But that's sort of a default, right? In a way. Transparency. But you still want transparency. You don't want any funny business. You don't want to have to guess. So imagine a new civilization where our governors, and I use that term broadly, everyone that governs us, with laws, regulations, what we think of tradition today. Imagine if we were able to go, create our little Google governance blockchain app, and we would see the transactions. We could have a dial and dial back the days and look at the transactions that our governors did. They wouldn't be able to skirt from it. Okay? We would know. And others would let us know. Transaction transparency is critical. So the principles. Not a whole lot, just some basic ones, right? Token holder recognition, token holder interest. Make sure the board has responsibilities well spelled out and they have a common vision. If they're not thinking alike, if their vision isn't like this together, then you're going to get what you got in the Bitcoin world. Fragmentation. You're going to get what you get in all other startups that don't have any governance. Okay? They get the app, they go viral, they get $1 billion, and then the partners can't agree on anything because they never really had a vision. Ethical behavior. Man. And a way to hold them to it. And the blockchain can do that. Because your decisions are there. Transparency. Put all those in place and you're going to have good governance. Or you have the beginning of good governance. You have to execute it. Another area to think about is risk mitigation. So the blockchain can be a risk mitigator, as well as you want to do risk mitigation in the blockchain. Both. It's paramount. Okay? It's almost as important as the primary plan. It's amazing that it's only being talked about and thought about now. But again, that's typically, right? It was a viral moment. It's there. Now it's maturing. People understand. You know, it's no longer a little child. It's an adolescent moving into the teenagers, and you need to regulate teenagers. Okay? But when executed effectively, you can prevent the scandals, the fraud, right? All the things that really you want to avoid. Good governance can build brand in the blockchain, right? Instead of doubt. Right? Or worthiness. Imagine the value of your tokens if people, ooh, I want to own that token so bad. Because all these other ones are crap. You just don't know when they're going to crash. Right? They're always arguing. They can never decide. That other token, those guys are like, oh my God, we're just looking at the token. It's finite economy. And people are like holding on, you know. So, right? Worthiness. So build an intrinsic value to the token. Something you want to hold. It says a shared philosophy. Because these blockchains, and they are like that. They're affinity groups. They can be applied to any kind of an affinity. The neighborhood, let's help the children, let's, whatever. Let's fix flat top. It doesn't matter, folks. Baby, I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. Figure out what your domain is and bring blockchain into your domain. You're here early. Just get your head early. You have that opportunity. You can literally build the first blockchain that picks up dog poop. Okay? Believe it or not, it's actually an issue. Okay? In this community of Austin, great dog owners, many places have issues. Imagine a blockchain where you can get rewarded for picking it up. It's like people are out there waiting for your dog to go. Hey, I collected 5 piles this week. I got 1 coin. You laugh, but my coin just went up 1,000%. Right? This is reality. And it'll govern people. Think about that. Governing, that's an act of governance, right? Picking up dog food. Who wants to do that? You don't have governance, you're not alive. You're a walking zombie. Okay? Don't crucify them too bad today because they're all new. So this is what we're talking about today. This is what we're looking at. This is where we want to go. Right? And if they don't go there, this is what you're going to end up with. Defective systems. Starting probably with the defective code in your wallet. You're going to wake up one morning and you're going to be all locked up, your money in your wallet's drained. And if you're one of those that got on that new real estate blockchain and you bought 3 rental properties, closed on them, put them on the blockchain, and now they're gone. You can't get them back. Audited, this is where we're headed, right? They will be audited. The feds are already gearing up on the criminal investigation. People think they've been sleeping. They haven't been sleeping, folks. They've been spying, watching, recording, learning. Okay? They don't knee-jerk. Right? They want to know where they're going to go, where this thing's going. It's all about ROI, even in their world. Return on investment. Right? I ain't going after that little guy unless I can get a blockbuster story in my name. Right? Simple thing. But don't think they're sleeping. The feds are there and they're just honest, obviously if your blockchain is corrupt, people are going to go, right? They're going to crash and burn. Let's get to the more exciting stuff. Thinking about what the people that are supposedly the leaders, right? So let's look at this. I'll just go speed up. Steve Terry, what is his thoughts on all this governance? Okay. Just to make sure everybody knows. Okay, so Vitalik Buterin is sort of quote the founder of Ethereum. Started early in block. He didn't do Bitcoin, but he started early Bitcoin magazine, so he was there from day one. Had a great vision of how to take a value exchange of Bitcoin, because that's what Bitcoin is. It just takes a penny from your wallet to her wallet, or from his wallet to your wallet. That's all you can do, folks. You can't make no other rules. You have to agree how much and who, right? Vitalik said, I want something richer. I want something that can do more at the transaction layer. If I can take the penny and I want to do something else with it, and then give it to them. So that's Ethereum, smart contracts. That's what's in between. Okay? Obviously, all the altcoin are clones, right? And there's a lot of them. And there's a lot of new creations, all based upon the same tenets of what a blockchain is. Decentralized network, consensus, agreement, right? And that varies. Bitcoin proof of work, Ethereum proof of work, soon to be proof of stake. Brandon's going to be talking about that. Anyhow, he's okay with it. He's behind governance. He's pushing for it. But his mind is in the code, and he sees right now. There's 2 concepts we're going to go over. One's called on-chain, off-chain, on-chain, off-chain. That's the governance in their mind today. Not the things we're talking about, okay? But this is what the coders are thinking about. So he likes off-chain. That's what Bitcoin does today. They make a change, and it's up to the miners to decide to adopt or not. That's off-chain. Okay? The new kids on the block, okay, they're doing on-chain. That means it's inside the code, like quantum. It's in the code. If there's a runaway rogue taken over or figured out how for pennies to do a distributed denial of service, I can jack the gas price up on him. Oh, you want to keep doing that? Okay, buddy, here, how about this much gas? How about this much gas? Sooner or later, he's going to say it's not an ROI, I'm shutting down. Okay? That's on-chain governance. Okay? As well as increase the block size. Okay? These are radical things to the other side of the camp. This guy here, a mathematician, right? He wrote Casper. He's behind Casper. Casper is a new Ethereum consensus model where they're moving from, right, proof of work to proof of stake. Okay? So this is what he's right. So, but the point is back to what he's thinking. He doesn't like it either. Okay? So he likes off-chain. So they're not too cool with the on-chain stuff. Doesn't seem they really trust the automation, the coding. Maybe they know that the governance is all missing. Anyhow, one of the things that this guy did, this whole article was really just a rebuttal on Fred. Okay, so Fred's a thinker, right? Co-founded Coinbase, right? Ex-Goldman Sachs, computer science, Duke U. You know this guy's bright. Well, he's all for it. He's ready to go code hog wild. Let's just put it all in the blockchain, right? AI, everything. A little too graphic. But here's some of the thinking. Ralph C. Merkle. Everything is built on Merkle trees. Ralph has a grand vision. Good paper to read. It is just a grand vision. Now this is for real. This is interesting. The Internet Governance Group. Okay? Worldwide body that governs our Internet. They're down on blockchain. But their take on the governance isn't the same as the coders and the guys creating it. Their take on it is really from the other end of it. How can we use governance to rule the world? Okay? But when you read their minutes of their meetings, you realize they're a very fragmented body today. Okay? They're all over the place. Very, very bright, brightest of the bright, right? But they can't agree on really anything. That's a good sign because it tells us where we're at. But it's important to know they're thinking about it. And that means if they're thinking about it, everyone else is thinking about it. Don Tapscott, right? He's a well-known leading speaker. Wrote one of the seminal intro books to describe, this revolution. Right? But he did a paper, World Economic Forum, worth reading. Very, very verbose and very explicit in the thinking. London School of Economics, world-renowned economic think tank. The law, they're approaching it. Blockchain financial governance, right? In the financial, how do you govern? So you can see these are different perspectives, right? Penn State University, this is interesting. This whole study was based on looking at any enterprise. And at the end of the day, the only thing they found of value is voting. That's blockchain. It governs. Another paper, this one is radical because he talks about, well, we even need the state. So he puts up a premise where blockchain can completely remove what we call today the state. So does that mean 50 years from now we can go to a place where there are no country borders anymore? I don't know. I doubt that because humans will need to evolve a lot before that. Wrapping this part, thinking, so really, we're early. On-chain, off-chain, that's really what they're thinking, right? In the blockchain world today. Governance tool, right? The people outside the blockchain, what are they thinking about? They're not thinking about it as the other group. They're thinking about it from a picture. Oh, this is a tool that we can use to govern things. How can we use it to govern it? And it can do that really well. Well, what does that mean, practicality? What can we do today? Oh, we can vote. Oh, okay, that's cool. I like that. That's the first thing you would do, right? Vote, vote, vote. That's what's happening today. So what's going to come? I don't know. There's a lot more to it. So the on-chain, and the off-chain. So we talked about on-chain. Right now what they're doing is all about automating the changes on the blockchain, all driven around consensus models. Some are so radical, they want to actually go flip out the consensus on you. Right? Operating parameters, like the block size. Okay? Off-chain, optional, fork, implicit control. That's an implicit form right there of governance, the off-chain. Whether they fork or not, whether they buy in or not. But you're left out. So who's doing it? Implementing it. Because these are the new wave of blockchains. So consensus is not a blockchain, but it's an 800-pound gorilla startup, right? Consulting everywhere. Okay? They have their own projects in-house too, and then they buy the projects, right? They're in bed with Microsoft and others. They have a thing called Boardroom. Okay, Chris voting. Consensus, right? Boardroom. A big governance platform. And in the day, what is it? Voting. Basically, you fill out a form called proposal, people vote. Dash, another blockchain. Oh, we're going to do governance in a decentralized project. These are blockchain projects that have already realized, oh, we need governance. We need to focus on governance. Governance is actually an application. This is their node. So, in some ways, Dash is similar to Lisk, right? The management of the vote, who hits the vote, who's the validators, who gets to do that work. Quantum, another one. Quantum, they're the ones right now that are doing, they're already doing like changing the block size, right? Getting a lot of press because the concept of being able to control the gas dynamically because there's a problem inside Ethereum and others, right, where you get hacked and you break down the network for denial of service, right? But in order for you to do anything in these networks, you have to pay something, toll. The toll, so if they figure out the hack, then the toll's so low, then they can bring it on. So if they can figure out then just jack the gas price up, the toll becomes exorbitantly high, then they'll stop. Just thinking, folks. Read the bottom. They haven't figured out an approach for what they really want to do, which is dynamically adjust the gas price. Thinking. But they do both. Microsoft. Wow, Microsoft? A legacy? Yeah. Cocoa framework. Okay, they got on, right? A year after I predicted, but they got on when I predicted, which was a year later. Right after IBM. I predicted IBM would get on. Then they got on, but they didn't have anything. They just wrote a white paper, put it out on GitHub, and then a year later, they came out with this framework, just a framework. So you plug in your blockchains, and then they'll run governance on it. But we haven't seen how this will play out yet. But again, same, this is implementing. This is what people are doing today. Very limited. Tezos, on-chain mechanisms, amends the rules governing the protocol, and rewards protocol development. A protocol, that's how they talk. Right. Alright. No, it's not about, we just want to create a whole community. But what's unique about them is they've got this concept they dreamed up called decentralized court system. The thing to keep in mind, folks, is that all these things are the seeds for tomorrow. Right? Whether it's a 12-year-old sitting in his bedroom right now reading Bitcoin code, learning C++, okay, or what? Or the NSA, right? Or the federal government, right? Or someone else. But they're seeds, so these are ideas that will get caught on. This one, they're radical. They just want to go the whole way. They skip it all, just go to democracy or just vote on everything. Go back to the caveman days. Another one. All right. We'll use our token to vote. Oh, that's okay. Great. So they're using tokens. Okay, I guess my toothpicks are no longer useful. Implementing. Well, they're only looking at software, right? And then, of course, the think tanks are looking at it from that policy, big picture, how to govern us. How do we use this technology to govern us? Well, the thing we need to think about is hardware. I don't know if you've been reading the news, but Intel's not having a very good day. Okay? And if you're in enterprise systems, you realize how vulnerable. All of us are. The only ones that aren't vulnerable are the ones who are running Raspberry Pi. Because their chips, their Cortex chips are safe. And it's an artifact of the race, because it's a design, an intentional design in the modern CPU to squeeze out more CPU power. And by doing that, they do tricks. And hackers love tricks. And it just so happens that they figure this trick out. And because of this trick, and everyone uses it in modern day CPUs, you're hacking. And what it really comes down to is that they can read your memory. The reality is they can read your memory. So everything is in your memory of your computer. Like when you go to your bank, everything you do is in your computer memory at some point. It might be encrypted on your disk, but at some point when you want to do something with it, it comes up here in memory and gets into clear text. Here's my password. And they're just sitting there lurking and waiting and reading and say, oh, that's not a password. Okay. HCI, human-computer interfaces. So you have one side of the can. They're not thinking about us. Like, right? We're in this knee-jerk, like, it's got to be all robots, all AI, no humans anymore. Nah. Breakers. Okay? The dowel, when it broke, right? It was like turning on a faucet. The dude figured out how to turn the faucet on. Supposedly a locked faucet. There supposedly wasn't even a faucet there, but he found a faucet in the back, in the closet. He brought in his bucket, which is his address. He stuck it under the faucet, and he turned it on. And he drained, and he drained, and he drained. And he brought it down. Same thing happens like parity. I hope none of you are victims of parity wallet, right? Twice, right? Recently, over 100 million bug in the code. Okay, so it's important to understand that. Good to be new, good to play, but I don't think I want to be the first one to put my house on. Not yet. One of the things that's missing is insurance, right? We had insurance. And the insurance companies make sure there's governance. Self-healing. Back to the breaker, so breaker switch, right? Put a breaker in. Do those guys really care about putting those kind of things in? No, because that means taking care of us. No, they're just there to do what? ICO. Breakers. Self-healing code. Okay? Amazon, Netflix, everybody does this all day long. Let's break our code and heal it. Let's not wait for the hackers to figure it out. Quarantine. Things happen. Things get bad. When they do, recognize it, quarantine it. If you got a bad contract, quarantine it. Take it off. People are starting to think about that. But you got to build code to the infrastructure to figure out how to do that. That's a problem. Because no one ever thought about it from day one. Process, society, community, regulation, arbitration, financial. You can figure that out yourself. Code is not safe. Think outcome, not the output. Okay? Future, what's it going to look like? Explicit is going to be regulation. You're going to see it. Implicitly, commerce. It's going to come in the back door. Right? You'll be governed by that. Directly, access to your assets. Okay? How will you get to your access? Right? Now, not tomorrow, but we're talking in the future. Okay? You'll need a key to prove provenance. That you own that property, you get title. Indirect compliance will be forced indirectly to be compliant, because once the feds institute blockchain for certain things, indirectly, when you do a transaction, wherever, Walmart, Target, insurance company, they know. Okay? They don't have to filter through their vast silos of credit card data, email, and blah, 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 right? It's like everybody's on that blockchain. You want a license to do business in the United States? Fill out the form, send it to this organization, and you get your keys. When you have your keys, you can transact. When you can transact, then you're in business. local behavior. When it's local, it will affect you. You can't get around it. We already are doing it. And of course, global is more on a social level. Because it affects you, but it's sort of like a teeny bit, but when you look at it on social, it's huge. Social. Even though when it's you, it's just, you just tweak a little bit, but the big picture is like, whoa, you see change in society. It doesn't always become regular right away. So that's really it. The 6 dimensions, the meaning, the thinking, the implementing, and the future. So it's really just start thinking about governance and how it applies to blockchain, and know that it's becoming ubiquitous and it's applied to your lives. Everything from the parking meters to your utilities, to flood votes, to insurance, to banking. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions?
I noticed you didn't mention open source as a system of governance. It's certainly changed a lot of the ways that companies do business, create and build them. It is not a hard, formal way of governing projects, but there have been proposals.
It falls under the category of foundation. Right? That's it. That's simple. So you start with Apache Foundation, right? Brian Lindor, okay? And now as far as blockchain, they're doing it right. You go with the Hyperledger Foundation, right? An umbrella of Linux Foundation. So that just, open source just falls into the foundation side. This can be done good, or
That's not always the case. In some open source projects, have operated solely on meritocracy. If I involved in influencing change, which direction to go, and code can always be forked. Sometimes the forks actually become.
yeah, I agree. And typically, I think what you're referring to is they actually do. They start with a cocoon, and then they grow, and then they realize they're at a point where they have to decide if they become commercial entity or they join on a foundation. Many of them will join Apache, right? This is traditional, right? Or they'll go commercial. I mean, that's at the end of the day. We're all starting out with a dream, and I think if that dream, if it does have an essence of, changing the world, and money is not part of their dream, and it's like just the reward for the equity that they produce, as opposed to being the thing they chase, it'll take its course. The problem, and I'm with you, open source, but at some point, the metal has to, the enterprises where they make decisions, they look at the governance, right? And they have a lot of hard times with open source because they don't want to bring it on because there's nobody to call, there's nowhere to go, there's no direction. So when they do, if they do decide to bring it in because it is Apache 2 license or MIT license, if it's the new, they don't want it. The enterprise. I don't find any enterprises that want it. Okay? And those that do bring it in, they hide it from the lawyers. The new. Right. So the only 2 acceptable, well, I got you 3, is Apache 2, bring it on. MIT, bring it on. BSD, bring it on.
But the Linux kernel is GPL.
Yeah, I know. Go figure. I know. I agree.
And it forms the core of kernel OS, which is
Yeah, I know. I agree with you. I've always tried to figure that paradigm out myself because it's like, right? You're sitting there and Linus is the governor. It's like Ethereum, right? The chair is the governor.
the benevolent dictator.
Exactly, and every coin has one. Okay? It might not be one, it might be 2 guys or 2 gals. Okay?
Bitcoin's actually sacrificed himself in order to at least sort of in some way extricate himself as that dictator. All the other cryptocurrencies do have sort of a very strict leader or a group of leaders behind them. I agree.
I agree. But they suffer from that, again, perceived lack of, they perceive from weak, I won't say lack of governance, because governance is implicit, but weak governance.
Right.
Right? Because when we come to the fourth issue. Right? And it's not, there's no right or wrong, black or white answer. Right? Because governance is us.
I think Satoshi's sacrifice was ultimately in order to make the governance process a little bit more liquid.
But I just hold up one thought, and that's, I'm prescribing, whatever, but, and I'm trying to be outside the box and think, okay, so for me in history, when I look throughout history, it's like, okay, so it's like governance. Well, I think the greatest model of governance that I've seen is right here, my system. And for me, when I drill it all and tear it all apart, it's like that thing called electoral college. That's a genius. That's like Bitcoin blockchain. It's like freedom. It's like when you separate all the pieces, there's nothing new, folks. It's all old stuff. Okay? But the chef figured out a new recipe, and the things that he combined, right, created this boom called Bitcoin. Well, actually called blockchain. Okay. Bitcoin, if you want, is a use case. It's the first successful application of blockchain.
So you said you've been involved in like ICOs, initial coin offering, right? And that's kind of like you're kind of making an analogy to IPOs, right? Of initial public offerings.
Yeah.
So and like those are securities, right? And the securities exchange committee are.
Well, they can be, and they might not be.
They've been regulating it, right? And that's.
Well, they haven't regulated it. They've given opinions, right? But it's not regulated yet. Unless you're talking about like futures.
Yeah.
Right. The CFTC or whatever, there are Bitcoin futures, and there will be other cryptocurrencies that they're looking at to bring on for futures trading. But that is restricted to the financial community and a segment of it. The bigger picture is what does FINRA and the SEC think, right, and others.
Because they're worried about money laundering and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, they're just worried about compliance, right? And if you're selling a security, then you need to comply, right? And I tell everyone, the hardest thing about an ICO is determining. Well, first of all, everyone wants to say it's not a security. Okay? But it has to pass a test called the Howey test, right? If it doesn't pass the Howey test, there's going to be a security. And I have to give everyone the caveat that, I heard an ex-regulator working for a cryptocurrency company, a state regulator, right, securities regulator, sit on a panel and casually say, oh yeah, when I was a state regulator, every morning I woke up, if I felt like I could have gone and convicted a hot dog on the Howey test. As a security. So one of the best test cases is Gigawatt. Okay, an ICO, they sell mining rigs, right? They did a deal out in Washington, D.C. with the claim they have the lowest energy kilowatt rate in the world, right? So they're like the hot spot to mine, right? The mining's all about electricity stuff, right? So what they do is they have a Singapore outlet that sells you the rig, right? They ship the rig to Washington, and they install the rig into these specially built boxes that these engineers built. They were building huge data centers the size of 2 football fields for Asians doing cryptocurrency mining, and they realized, they said, dude, this is like so wasteful, we could build little modules, and then we'll just sell the capacity. That's what they did. So they did an ICO, they sell WATT, W-A-T-T tokens that you buy, and what you do is you buy those tokens, and you redeem the tokens for your rig, and that rig gives you the right to run on their farm. And you can rent your token if you don't want the rig. So they got a business model that says if you buy, you have to, don't quote me on this, I'm just giving you wild examples, right? The idea is that you buy, say, 1,000 tokens and you make $2 a year income. Okay, great. Just renting your token, right? It's probably a little higher. Or you buy the tokens and you run your rig, and the equivalent, because of the cost of energy is so low, right? You get the same payback or a higher payback. So if you're a miner and you're mining cryptocurrency, cost of electricity is everything. So when you can get it at a 40% discount, your revenues go.
Now, Lisk works on something called delegated proof of stake. And so basically what that means is the token holders get to vote. And we'll get into that in a second. Now, what are the motivations of the Lisk Foundation? Well, one, they hold a lot of Lisk. Oliver Beddoes and Max Kordek both have about 4 million Lisk. The Lisk Foundation also has about 4 million Lisk. So with so much Lisk, they want to see it increase in value. So they want to do a good job of making your product. Can you hear me?
We can't hear them. We can't hear the presentation.
All right, so we're talking about the Lisk Foundation and kind of what their motivations are in building out Lisk. And as I was saying, the founders have a good amount of Lisk themselves. So when they issued the ICO and all the cryptocurrency tokens, they reserved some for themselves. So Max Kordek has about 4 million Lisk, Oliver Beddoes has about 4 million Lisk, and the foundation has reserved about 4 million Lisk for future development as well. Altogether, that totals up to, including the Bitcoin that they raised in their ICO, they've got about $250 million in assets altogether. So with all this Lisk, one thing they want to do is provide a good product, and hopefully their Lisk will appreciate it. They also want to be part of something. I was trying to speak up, I'm sorry. They also want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They have an opportunity to change the world, and so this is the way they're doing it. While doing that, they're getting social recognition from Vitalik and all the other guys, Gavin and all the other guys in the blockchain space. But that's about as far as their role goes. They write this code, but they're not the ones who make it happen. All they can kind of do is propose the code. Before I move on, the next thing we need to look at is what a basic Lisk transaction works like. And this is kind of similar in a lot of different blockchains. But what you start out with is some sort of wallet. Somebody does a send transaction, and so they're saying, I want to send 100 Lisk to this gal over here. That transaction gets broadcast out to the network. The network is a bunch of different computers that are kind of listening for transactions, keeping copies of the blockchain. And their transaction becomes part of something called a transaction pool. So it's kind of waiting to be processed and officially made a part of the blockchain. In Lisk, the folks that do that they're called delegates. And so Lisk has 101 people, and their job is to process these transactions and make them into blocks and then put them onto the blockchain. And so you have all those delegates waiting in line. They're each taking their turn. And once it becomes their turn, what they do is they are allowed to grab up to 25 transactions from the transaction pool. They put them into a block, and they sign the block. They connect the block to the prior blocks with a hash. And once all that's done, they broadcast it out to the network. And then it's the next delegate's turn to take 25 more transactions and repeat the process over and over again. In return for this, they're getting block rewards. So every block that a delegate processes, they get 4 Lisk in return. So they want to be in this position of processing blocks. For one reason, is because they make Lisk doing it. So the delegates run the code, and they basically act as supernodes. Now, when I say they run the code, that's an important part of the blockchain governance. Lisk can do all this work and come up with a new upgrade to the code, but the delegates still have to be the ones who run it. And if the delegates decide that, hey, we don't want to run that code, well then, they almost have a veto power over what code actually gets run. So you kind of see, sort of a check and balance happening in the Lisk blockchain governance. So again, the delegates, they process transactions by forging blocks, they broadcast their forged blocks, and they listen for what other delegates delegates are saying the blockchain is. And they kind of get to come up with their own idea of what they think what the blockchain, which blocks they're going to recognize. Now, of course, they could do something on their own thing and nobody else would follow them, and what they're doing is basically meaningless. But if enough of them kind of agree, they come to a consensus, then maybe the reality can change depending on what the delegates think a valid transaction is.
You got to remember about the voters. The voters also might think that that's a problem.
They never know why.
Might disagree.
I would. And so delegates maintain a copy of the blockchain. And again, this is the next part of the piece of it, is that they are elected. And so if delegates start to do something funky, voters can change their mind, and they say, we don't like that guy. He's devaluing our list. He's making an unstable network. He's not contributing. We want somebody else who we think is going to give us more bang for our vote. So that's the next key component of the Lisk blockchain governance, is that these delegates, the people processing the transactions, the ones deciding what code they're going to run, they are voted on by people who hold Lisk tokens. So this whole process is called delegated proof of stake. It's kind of a twist on what they call proof of stake, which basically however much tokens you hold, that's how much your vote weighs, and that's it. Well, in Lisk, you actually get to vote on the delegates, and then they sort of do what you want for you. So again, there's 101 delegates in Lisk, and the 101 with the most votes are allowed to forge the blocks and then figure out what code they're going to run. The way the voting works is that, you see this picture on the right, if we have a voter with 100 lists, they can vote up to 101 people. So I could vote for Edward and myself and 99 other people. If I have 100 lists, every person I vote for gets 100 lists worth of vote from me. So it's not like my 100 list gets divided among 101 delegates. No, each person I vote for gets the full voting weight of however much lists I have. But you do see the more lists that you have, the more that your vote counts. So that's one aspect of list governance. They think that people have more stake in the game. Maybe they care more about what happens to the network. Maybe they have more. They don't want it. They're more incentivized to not let anything bad happen to the network. So people who have more lists end up with basically a heavier voting weight. The voting process is very easy in Lisk. People just open up their wallets. The voting process is right there in their wallet. And they can kind of go down the list and search for who they want to vote for. They check the box and then click vote on the right, and their vote gets cast. If the people later sell some of their list, let's say I sell half my list. Well, now all these delegates that I voted for, they get half of the voting weight as I had before. So it changes. I don't have to re-vote. My vote of 100 doesn't stay 100 forever if I sell half my list. It goes down as I sell off my list or buy more lists. And ultimately, this is kind of what the forging delegates look like. These are the top 101 forging delegates as of probably yesterday. You can see on the far right, it has an approval rating. The very first one has 32%. That basically means 32% of all Lisk out there has voted for this guy who's number one. It kind of goes down from there. So why do people vote for delegates? Well, they've got different motivations to do so. Number one, they want delegates who are going to be able to run the nodes smoothly and process the transactions smoothly and have high uptime and not do things in such a way that there's disagreement on the network. They're going to run the version of code that you want. So if the delegate's trying to say, oh, I've got this new and improved code that I'm doing, but nobody else wants to do it, then maybe the voter doesn't want to vote for that. They don't want to vote for that delegate who's going to run this weird version of code that's going to maybe cause problems. They probably want to see delegates who contribute to the Lisk ecosystem. So maybe they want to see tools. Voters want to see tools that they can use in one way or another to monitor their votes or make it easier to do something. Maybe they want delegates who are going to develop side chains and the idea of like, hey, they're going to make these cool apps that I can use, or maybe they're going to make cool apps that other people are going to use. And if other people are using these cool apps, then my list could be more valuable. They may want delegates who have media properties, like blogs or how-to tutorials or reviews on other delegates. They may want people who are contributing to the code base, like maybe they've got some interesting spin on what Lisk should be, and then they've got the Lisk Foundation's ear, like her ears, of what sort of code ought to be worked in there. They might like folks like that. Maybe they like delegates who make it easier to learn how to use Lisk or sidechains, or maybe easier to develop. And maybe they like delegates who sponsor meetups. When we get over to Edward over here. And another key feature that you will find in Lisk is that delegates tend to share their block rewards with their voters. So if a delegate gets 4 lists per block, they may say, hey, whoever votes for me, I'm going to give one of those lists back to my voters in proportion that they voted. So some voters may want to see delegates who share the maximum amount possible. So delegate motivations. These guys, they tend to hold a lot of Lisk. They vote for themselves as well. The more lists they have voting for them, the more likely they are to be in this position of a key governance position. And so, they want to see the value of Lisk increase. So, they want to do a good job. They want to make sure the Lisk network is respected and functions well. They may want to see high block rewards. Wouldn't it be great if we got 10 lists per block that we forge? They may want to see high transaction fees, or at least as much as voters or users will tolerate. Of course, they want to stay elected. So they want to, if they start to make users unhappy, then maybe they're going to change the way they're doing things. And they want an opportunity to contribute and be a part of something important. The voters, they have their own motivations as well. And I mentioned earlier we have kind of 2 camps of Lisk voters. Some people, maybe they just hold Lisk hoping that it will go up in value. Well, those folks, they want Lisk to have a good reputation. They want it to work well. They want it to be stable. They want to see things happening that sort of grow the ecosystem and, in their eyes, make it more valuable. They want to see users be able to use Lisk and have it where it's something that people want, because if nobody's using Lisk, what's the point of holding any Lisk? And of course, they want to see delegates who share lots of Lisk with them, because it almost becomes like they get more money, delegates share more with them. As opposed to speculators, there's users, and they may have slightly different motivations. They're definitely going to want to see low transaction fees. I mean, maybe even free. I don't think that probably ever going to happen in Lisk, just because you've got to have some sort of charge, or else people just sort of spam the network with meaningless transactions. But they may want low transaction fees. They want a coin that allows them to do all sorts of things. They want high utility. They may want an ecosystem where they can learn how to use it and integrate in it very easily. They may want a large ecosystem where they can do lots of different things. So what we've seen with Lisk is you kind of have a different set of checks and balances among the key players. The Lisk Foundation is well funded. They have all those employees. They have lots of expertise. They have the voters' ears. They have the Lisk.io and the GitHub and of course lots of money. All these marketers, and they can certainly influence voters. They can write some great code and they can publish the code. And they can also publish the wallets that most of the users tend to run. But they can't make users run the wallets. They can't make delegates run their code. So their power is sort of limited to that point right there. Now delegates, they have a check on the Lisk Foundation. They can choose which code they want to run. Now, so far, the Lisk Foundation proposes what code they think would be great when delegates are running it. We haven't seen anybody say, no, we're not going to run that code. But I think it could happen at some point in the future. For example, let's say the new code cuts the block rewards that the delegates would get. Maybe they wouldn't like that. And the delegates say, no, we're not going to upgrade to that code, because that would mean we make less money. The Lisk network won't work without them, so delegates are definitely a key position in the ecosystem. But the delegates are checked by the voters. They are there because people are voting for them. So if they start to do something that's too self-interested, then presumably the voters will not vote for the delegates, and they'll be out and somebody else will be in. And then we have the voters, the third key player. And they may be the most powerful of all. They're selecting the delegates, and the delegates are kind of choosing whether the Lisk Foundation, whether their ideas are being brought to fruition or not. They're largely responsible for the value of the tokens. If the voted people aren't buying Lisk, they're not using Lisk, then Lisk is basically worthless. So, but they are highly influenced by the Lisk Foundation. You know, they go get their news, they read all the blogs, and so they are manipulated to some extent by the Lisk Foundation itself. One of the voters' key powers, other than voting, is which wallets they run. You know, they could run a wallet with a completely different set of features if they wanted to. They could point their wallets at a different set of nodes if they wanted to. So if they started doing that, maybe you have some sort of a fork. But if they kind of take the ball and go home, then the voters have a lot of power as well. And we have some differences in the motivations of investors and users. So that's kind of the Lisk blockchain governance in a nutshell.